We got another one, and he's bringing that game-breaking speed to Coral Gables. Top-end running back from the 954 to the 305. Chris Wheatley-Humphrey, welcome to the U.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno, your host. I'm a University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, and contributor to allhurricanes.com. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen today. We are available free wherever you get your podcasts and available free on YouTube. I'm always smiling when Miami gets a new verbal commit. Chris Wheatley-Humphrey, game-breaking speed, guys. 6 foot tall, 170 pounds. Humphrey at South Broward High School, that's where he plays, South Broward in high school. His numbers from his junior season, they look forged. Like, this doesn't look real. It looks like something you might put up when you're playing a video game on easy mode. 16.7 yards per carry last year as a junior, and that was on 70 carries. So it's not like, hey, he only carried a few times, broke off a couple of big runs. 16.7 yards per carry, 1,166 yards rushing, 1,166 yards, and he scored 8 touchdowns last year. And if you watch Humphrey's huddle reel, seems like every one of his highlights is breaking off a 60 or 70-yard touchdown run to the house. He's got great moves and shiftiness in space to elude tacklers, and then he can just turn on those afterburners. So I'm excited to get the commitment. Obviously, he's been happy with what he's seen in Miami from the recent visits he's taken. And so let's bring on a good friend and colleague to break this all down. Brian Smith, who does an awesome job, allhurricanes.com and all over Fan Nation. Brian, good morning to you, sir. How you doing?
Doing well. How about yourself, Alex?
I'm doing very well. I'm always doing a little bit better when we can keep filling out this class of 2024. What's your take on Chris Wheatley-Humphrey? And, you know, this is a guy, and people always ask, well, Donno, how come you didn't mention how many stars does this kid have? Because some people only wake up for the 4 and 5 stars. He is a 3-star player, Brian. So is he on the higher end of 3 stars, in your opinion?
He's not a 3-star player. He's above that. This is a classic case of he wasn't on a whole bunch of 7-on-7 teams. He didn't get thrown into the spotlight early, and he doesn't play at a prominent program in Broward. It's just exposure. Yeah. But his offer list is the only thing that matters. I actually heard about him from a college coach last year. They're like, you need to check this kid out. And I went and watched the film, and I'm like, I've never seen the high school play, but I'm going to go out of my way to see him as soon as I can because of this kid. He was just running away from everybody. Wow. And as to your point, he's in South Florida. If you're running away from guys in South Florida, that's fast. So his yards per carry, it's funny. I was watching your intro, and I'm like, that's a really good way to put it. It's like Bo Jackson on Tecmo Bowl. It was just ridiculous watching him. So it's funny that he's at a school that doesn't get a lot of exposure, but he had a ton of offers. What does that really tell you about his long-term future at the U? It's pretty telling.
Yeah, and, you know, how important is it for Miami, before we kind of get back onto Humphrey and the running back position, but Miami adding speed and recruiting Brian, because one of the big things that stood out about the poor season Miami had in 2022, and I talked to a lot of former ball players about this, especially, you know, guys who don't cover Miami on a day-to-day basis and just watched him a few times last year, former players, and they're like, when did the U get so slow? Like, why were they so, the offensive playmaking just wasn't there last year? You know, how did this team get so slow? And, you know, I see Miami, you know, adding guys like Ray Joseph and Chris Johnson in this class, and Robbie Washington, who have great speed. And then you look at a guy like Chris Wheatley-Humphrey coming in next year in 2024. I mean, that's what you got to do to make Miami look like Miami again, right?
It's absolutely a part of the process. I've had more than one person tell me in their own view, people that cover the Canes and people around South Florida, that they didn't believe Mario understood just where the roster was until he'd been there for a few games. And of course, the injuries didn't help last season either. You and I have had that discussion many times off the record, but Miami wasn't as fast as you would normally think a Hurricanes team would be. But you had Chris Johnson and you had the two receivers they got last year and a few of the other guys they've had transfer in. The roster is just completely different. A buddy of mine who isn't even a Miami fan called me yesterday and told me about that's a totally different team. Good upgrades. There's more speed. That they're going to be a lot better this year. So adding Huntley and all these guys that they're getting in general that can run between year one and say year three, the difference in the Miami roster is just going to be night and day. So the spring game was an indicator, but it's going to go up another level, I think, in 2024. And Wheatley-Humphrey is just a great example of that.
I like that. I hadn't had a chance to talk to you yet about Dylan Day, the cornerback from Baton Rouge that Miami added earlier this week. He seems to kind of check off a similar box to what you talked about with Chris Wheatley-Humphrey being, a three-star guy who's a little bit under the radar. Now, when I talked about him the other day being under the radar, I got an upset comment from someone in Baton Rouge who goes to a lot of his high school games, who's like, he's not under the radar here. And what is the high school? I think Southern Lab or something, the name of that high school, that's a prominent program. So he was upset with me for referring to Dylan Day as being under the radar. Maybe from a national standpoint and certainly from a Miami standpoint, he was. And I think Dylan could end up being someone who maybe picks up that fourth star next year.
Dylan is a great case for just how much talent is in Louisiana. And by the way, just as a reminder, I'm sure you've probably mentioned this on the show, both of Miami's coordinators are from the state of Louisiana. The Canes kind of walked into a little bonus by signing both of those guys. Dawson and Guidry are both from the Pelican State. And per capita, it's as good a state as there is in the country for talent. So he plays for F3. It's one of the best 7-on programs in the Southwest area. And I've seen that program a number of times. If you're on that squad, that's all I really need to know. It's kind of like their version of SFE or something like that. It's one of those programs you're going to play college football. So, and I watched his film, his rankings and all that just aren't indicative. He's a hitter and he can really run. He's got great hands. I don't know which position they're going to play him at, but that's a good problem. He could be a nickel, he could be a corner, he could be a safety. As the saying goes, you figure it out when he gets there. So versatility never goes out of style. He has all the athletic tools you want, and he's physical. There's nothing not to like about it. And it's kind of funny that he's literally in the shadows of Tiger Stadium at LSU because he's just literally right down the road, and he's committed to Miami. It's hilarious.
That is a great point when you bring that up. I want to circle back to Miami's backfield when we come back and how Chris Wheatley-Humphrey may fit into that once he arrives at the University of Miami. So keep it locked right here. Brian Smith is with us on Locked On Canes. And folks, make sure you're keeping it locked to FanDuel because we have so much going on in the FanDuel space. Hold on, let me get our nice boom. Look at that background. How beautiful is that? Folks, Major League Baseball is back. The NBA playoffs are going on. So you got those grand slams, no hitters, double plays. It's all back. There's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel. That's America's #1 sports book. That's because right now, new customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up, place your first bet, and then get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. That means you have nothing to lose on that first bet. And, of course, my Miami Heat are back in action tonight in the playoffs. They took Game 1 against Milwaukee, and their reward for winning Game 1 is their 9.5-point underdogs in Game 2. So if you think maybe, the Heat can keep it close or take a commanding 2-game lead on the Bucks, you look at Heat plus 9.5 tonight. And guess what? If you don't win that bet, you still get the money back in bonus bets anyway with your no sweat first bet. So how freaking good is that? So don't miss your chance at that no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts and available free on YouTube. And thank you to the everydayers who are with us every single day. We're actually going to have a late afternoon episode today with the truth teller, Bruce Warner. And we're going to be talking more recruiting tomorrow on Wednesday with John Garcia Jr. It's recruiting season now that spring football is behind us. But we're talking Chris Wheatley-Humphrey here with Brian Smith allhurricanes.com, and Fan Nation. So, Brian, you look at the future of Miami's backfield. You've got incoming freshmen Mark Fletcher and Chris Johnson coming in. And then next year, Chris Wheatley-Humphrey, assuming he signs his national letter of intent and all that, is going to be joining Miami in 2024. How do you see the trio of them complementing one another in the future of Miami's backfield?
It's a great combination. You need bigger backs, you need speed backs, you need guys that can catch the ball, and this trio can all do those things. So it really comes down to just learning the playbook and which guys want to put in the effort. Fletcher is the most plug and play because he's a big dude. He was 230 or so at one point last year, but he's down to like 215, 220. I think he's going to come in and play really early. It would not surprise me if he challenged for carries in fall camp and ended up in the two deep. He's a great kid. He's the kind of guy that coaches, players, everybody's going to gravitate to. And once he gets in that lineup, you also can wear down a defense. And that's where Chris Johnson and guys like Wheatley-Humphrey, those guys can kill you. Once you're tired, nobody wants to chase the rabbit. And both those guys are track kids. Just to put it in perspective, as a reminder, Chris ran 10.45 in high school. I don't care what state you're in. That's a lot of speed, man. That's a lot of speed. I went out to a Dillard practice last year and he ran by me and his hair was flowing up just from the natural. It was hilarious. And he's just fast. And there's nothing you can do if you don't have leverage on the perimeter. If you do not set the edge against guys like that, it's lights out. And Chris can catch. This is where it gets really fun. And it's an endless conversation. The air raid offense is going to find ways to get slots and running backs the ball one-on-one with a player that's not as fast or as twitchy as they are. And then it's just about which guy wants it more. I'll take the speed that Miami is recruiting right now every time. Every now and then you might stick them, but there's going to be plays that it's a 3-yard pass that ends up a 70-yard touchdown. Some of those plays that like Ray and some of those kind of plays that you saw in the spring game, you're just going to have more of that moving forward. Chris Johnson adds it. Wheatley-Humphrey adds to it. Look for them to use them in dual roles. I mean, one of them could be in the slot, one could be in the backfield. You put so much stress on the defense. And then again, Fletcher can catch too. He beats you up, and then the speed runs around you. It's a great compliment to one another.
I want to ask you on the defensive side of the ball, because you were out at the spring game this past Friday. How good is Ruben Bain?
I spoke to Ruben after the game. He was just blase, no big deal.
Yeah, another day for him.
He's a very unique player physically. I asked him, he looked a little bigger to me. I said, what do you weigh? And he said 270. And I didn't know that. I thought he was 250, 255. And he said he'd been up to about 260 at the end of his career in Miami Central. And he's still swell, like he's put together. He's put in the time. But the most important thing that I took away from the game was how he did it. He told me he recognized formations and situations, and it changed what he did for his get off, his move to get past the offensive tackle. He's such an intelligent young man, and he's really laid back too. He's a joy to talk to. That's going to get him on the field, not only in Miami, but probably the level after that as well. He figures it out, play to play. You can't just go by God-given ability at the college level, let alone the NFL level. And he's already figured that out. He's somebody that's going to contribute right away for the Hurricanes.
Well, I appreciate this man's time. As always, you want to make sure to follow Brian Smith on Twitter at FBScout_Florida. Check out his work at allhurricanes.com. He is a colleague of mine there, and he's working so hard each and every day. You can check his work out all over Fan Nation as well. And guys, I encourage you to check out our exclusive SMS texting service through Subtext. You can basically continue the talk show with me all throughout the day. I do one-on-ones. I answer your questions on there, and we give you guys scoops and breaking news. Like, if you want to know recruits are happening before they happen, we get some of that as well on the subtext. So there's going to be a link in the show description below where you can join completely free for the first 14 days. And then if you want to stick around, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. It's a nice way to say thank you to the show. And if you don't want to opt in, no sweat. Completely free for the first 14 days. So we include the link below to our subtext service. Brian Smith, Thank you so much, my friend. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'm sure we'll be bugging you a lot as the recruits hopefully continue to pile in.
Thank you very much, sir. Have a great day.
Great stuff as always. And yeah, we'll talk to you guys in the late afternoon today around 5 p.m. again on another episode of Locked On Canes, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.